KL Productions presents
The Little Goddess by Ryan C. Sanders. Latusa sat on the warm porch steps of her grandmother's house, watching the hazy trail of smoke swirl in the air. The sharp scent of Granny's Benson cigarette clung in the humid air of Louisiana afternoon. Inside, the oven was warm and sweet smells of Granny's favorite red velvet cake danced through the air of the screen door, filling the small house with a sense of comfort that Latusa longed to wrap herself in. Granny, though bound to her wheelchair for as long as Latusa could remember, had a way of making everything feel safe. She never raised her voice. She never criticized. She was, in Latusa's eyes, the only constant in the world that felt far too chaotic. Her mother, on the other hand, although she loved her very dearly, she was a whirlwind of low-functioning behavior. Latusa had grown up in the shadow of her mother's anger, an anger that seemed to have no end and no real beginning. There were good days when her mother would smile or play with her hair, but those moments were fleeting, like a cloud that drifted past the sun for a second before being blown away. More often, her mother would disappear for days, leaving Latusa with Granny. "Come here, Papoose," Granny called from the open doorway, the cigarette balanced between her fingers. She was the only one who called her that, a nickname she'd been using since Latusa could walk. "This cake ain't gonna bake itself, you know." Latusa jumped up and ran to the doorway, slipping inside as the screen door creaked shut behind her. She found Granny rolling herself toward the counter where the mixing bowls were set up. Her silver hair, streaked with white, was tied back in a low bun, and her glasses perched on her nose as she measured the flour with the precision of a scientist. "You ready to learn the secret?" Granny asked, her voice warm with amusement. "The secret to red velvet cake?" Latusa's eyes lit up. Baking with Granny was one of her favorite things, a moment when the outside world didn't matter. Granny shook her head with a knowing smile. "No, Papoose, the secret to life, baby." Latusa frowned, confused. "I thought we were making cake." "We are," Granny said, "but life is like baking. You gotta have the right ingredients, but more importantly than that, you gotta know how to treat them." Latusa watched as Granny shifted the flour and added cocoa powder. She could never understand how Granny could do everything from her wheelchair. Despite the limitations of her legs, she moved around the kitchen with a grace that Latusa admired. Granny had once told her stories about when she could walk, back when she was a girl as young as Latusa. But even after losing her ability to walk, Granny never let it slow her down. She always seemed to know the answers to life's biggest questions, the kind that left Latusa lying awake at night, wondering why her mother couldn't love her the way Granny did. Granny poured the bright red batter into the pan and placed it in the oven. Then she turned her chair to Latusa's face. She sat at the small kitchen table, picking at the edge of her sleeve. "You know, Papoose," Granny said softly, "your mama got a lot of pain in her heart. Sometimes when people are hurt, they don't know how to love others the way they should." Latusa looked down, not wanting to admit the truth that tugged at her. "She doesn't love me?" Granny rolled her chair closer and reached out, taking Latusa's small hand in hers. Her skin was warm and soft, the years of life etched into the palms. "No, child. She loves you. She just don't know how to show it. But it don't mean you don't have to grow up the same way, baby." Latusa lifted her eyes to meet Granny, unsure of what to say. "Let me tell you about what it means to be a sacred woman," Granny said, her voice thick with wisdom she gathered through the years. "A sacred woman knows her power comes from within. She knows how to take care of her body, her spirit, her mind. She heals herself even when the world tries to break her. Like you, Granny?" Granny smiled softly, her eyes crinkled at the corners. "I ain't perfect, Papoose, but I learned the hard way that if I didn't love myself, nobody else would know how to either." Latusa leaned forward, intrigued. Granny spoke with a clarity that made everything feel so simple, even though she knew her mother's world was anything but simple. You see, child, the world will throw you a lot. People, even those who should love you, might hurt you. But the real secret is to never let that pain stick to your heart. You keep it clean by loving yourself first. You keep it sacred, like a beautiful garden that you protect with everything you got, you heard me? Latusa thought about her mother. She thought about the nights she cried herself to sleep, wishing things were different, wishing her mother would hold her the way Granny did. How do I do that, Granny? She whispered. You listen to the quiet voice inside you, Granny said, tapping her chest gently. The voice is always there, even when the world is loud. You treat yourself with kindness. You find beauty in the small things, like baking a cake or sitting in the sunshine. And when others try to hurt you, you remember that their pain ain't yours to carry. The oven timer dinged, signaling that the cake was ready. Granny wheeled herself back to the counter, pulling the warm red cake from the oven and sitting it on the cooling rack. The sweet smell filled the kitchen, wrapping around Latusa like a warm hug. I'm gonna teach you everything I know, Granny said as she wiped her hands on the apron. Not just about cake, but about life, because one day you'll be a sacred woman too. And when that time comes, you'll know how to heal others, just like you healed yourself. Tears welled up in Latusa's eyes. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a future, one where she wasn't defined by her mother's brokenness, but by the strength of Granny's teaching her to find it within herself. Thank you, Granny, Latusa whispered, her voice shaky with emotion. Granny reached out and brushed a tear from Latusa's cheek. Don't thank me, Papoose. Just promise me you'll always remember who you are. A sacred woman, even when the world tries to tell you otherwise. And in that moment, sitting at the kitchen table with the smell of red velvet cake lingering in the air, Latusa decided to live the rest of her life being mindful of the ingredients she chooses to make her velvet cake of life. She would carry Granny's wisdom with her always.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe.